What's up, guys? Mason the Brock Henderson here, and this is Bull Season 5, Episode 7, The Head of the Goat. So, a pretty good episode for Benny. Very interesting premise in its setup where he's defending this woman who seems really bad. She's the wife of a guy who killed an ATF agent and his two sons with a bombing. It's not a good look for her, and it's also not a good look for Benny running for DA, defending somebody like this who essentially is married to a guy who's like, screw the government, screw everybody who works for the government, and all that stuff. But because I know how the show works, because it's not one of those shows that likes to end on a sad note most of the time, I kind of figured it was going to end with them just proving her innocence, her getting off, and then it makes Benny look great. And that's basically what happens with Izzy's assistance, getting him some backers. So it does seem like he's going to be doing okay as far as his run for the DA. I still don't know if he's actually going to get it or not, because again, I feel like if he did, he wouldn't really be able to be a part of the team anymore. So it feels like he'd be off the show, but maybe not. Maybe they would, again, still keep him on the show, just doing more DA things separate from the group, and how that would all sort of work together. But yeah, it's a good setup for this season. I've liked how they've sort of progressed it bit by bit throughout the season. They're not like rushing forward, and they're also not ignoring that story for several episodes, and then all of a sudden, oh yeah, by the way, you remember that Benny's doing this? NCIS, I think, and Criminal Minds were two of the worst about doing that, where you would have something going on in one of the characters' personal lives, and then like you don't hear about it for 4 or 5 episodes, and all of a sudden it pops back up again. You're just like, oh yeah, I remember that. I feel like Bull has done a good job, at least so far in these past 2 seasons, of whenever there is something going on behind the scenes, whether it's Marissa and her divorce, whether it was Chunk and his daughter last season, whether it's Benny running for DA this season, it's all been stuff that has been consistently happening. If it's not in one episode, it's going to be in the next episode, at least mentioned. I feel like that's a better setup because it keeps us more engaged and it makes us really feel like what's going on is really happening for all these characters. So I have to appreciate that because, again, in shows like Bull, they typically don't take that care to try to make sure that they're keeping up with these stories. As far as the case itself, there is good and bad in it, because you've got your debate of what is free speech, because obviously there's been a lot of talk about that recently, especially the past couple years. And in a scenario like this, like, it's definitely one of the big gray areas. This guy making all of these threats online, talking about killing people. Obviously, that's not good, and it's good to monitor somebody like that to make sure they don't go and do what he did. But there is also the question of, well, how much leeway do you give into that line of logic of just monitoring people who seem like they might be a threat? Because then, well, who's a threat? Like, oh, well, who's determining who's the threat? Who's in charge of that? Because all it takes is one law that suddenly makes it where, well, the government can now do this if they determine you're a threat. And the people up there might think that somebody who's not really a threat to anybody else but the government, some of what they're saying might be considered dangerous for the people who are making millions and millions of dollars off of us, suddenly now saying, you know what, that person, they're threatening what we're doing here. They're a danger. Go get them. And yeah, at that point, that's when it becomes very scary, and that's one of the reasons why the free speech is such a big deal and something that has been discussed so much, basically. But yeah, this whole setup, though, having the FBI agent kind of being the one who is more at fault because he seemed to know what was going on, but he didn't keep a close enough eye on this guy, which is weird to me since they were keeping so many tabs on him. How were they not able to see that he went and got explosives? Like that. I feel like that was something that should have been discussed a bit more. Like, he was trying to sell him the explosives so that way they could be like, all right, we got him. But he never did. So where did he go get the explosives? And how did he do it without them finding out, since they were watching his everyday life? So yeah, I do find that a little bizarre. But there is something to be said about undercover missions like that, because it is kind of funny to me. I've heard stories about this really happening in real life, where you've got these very radical groups that government agencies will try to basically get in undercover and take them down from the inside by almost forcing their hand. And I find that very weird because a lot of these groups, they are worried about the government coming after them. And of course, most of us would think, oh, they're not coming after you, they don't care about you. But then the government does go after them and essentially infiltrates and then sets them up, basically hands them the bomb or the weapons and says, all right, go get them. Just kidding, you're under arrest. And like, there is a point to be made there where it's like, but you're basically proving their point. Their whole point is the government is out to get us. The government doesn't like us. They want us locked away. And then you go and do exactly that. And granted, again, a lot of these are more extremist. They are making legitimate threats. So it is something to be concerned about. But there are some that they don't make any threats. There's one I remember hearing about. There was no threats being made. They were just essentially like trying to live without the government in a sense. And if there were anybody from the government to try to intrude on their land, that's whenever they became a danger. So it was almost one of those like, don't mess with us and we won't mess with you. And I heard that, I heard the story. Apparently the government did infiltrate. They did send a guy to work undercover and they gave him all the stuff he needed to build a bomb and convinced him, oh no, you need to act first. And I'm like, but that, you turned him from he's not a danger, he's not going to do anything as long as you don't mess with him, and then you made him a danger. So it's very bizarre, and it's something that I feel like it's not talked about enough because most people don't think it really happens that often, but I think it probably happens a bit more often than we think. I mean, honestly, if people don't think that you're being watched, like I'm posting this on YouTube, I'm sure some government agency is probably watching this video, more than likely. But it's just a matter of when do they start deciding, oh, well, that guy might be a threat? What point do they make that determination, and at what point do they actually step in and try to make something happen? And that thought process can be a little scary, and it can make you kind of feel like, well, are they actually working to protect us, or are they working to protect themselves and their own interests? So yeah, I don't know. It's just something to think about. I don't really know how I feel about it, like, totally. I've seen both sides. I get the idea of protecting people from guys like who is represented here, who clearly he wanted to do something about these people that he thinks are just absolutely destroying our country and all this stuff. And then you've also got the other instances where it does feel like the government maybe has a little too much reach into our personal lives and essentially trying to control us through some of these government agencies. It's an interesting debate, and one that I'm not really going to weigh on either side and say that I'm fully agreeing with either side, because there's good and bad for both. But yeah, it's just an interesting concept for the first of these 3 episodes. But that's about it for this one, so on to episode 8. I'll see you there. And now episode 8, Cloak and Beaker. Pretty solid episode. I will admit, when this came out, because I checked the date, it came out in February of last year, 2021. Yeah, this would have been an interesting topic of conversation based on this episode, because it involved a very big company who is trying to essentially sell their own drug that they were making a ton of money off of, and they were trying to discredit this one guy and his research, which would essentially lead to no money for them. Now, granted, it's not quite the same because the real-world implications were more one company trying to sell a vaccine and a drug that could possibly work to treat it instead of selling a vaccine. And if there's a drug to treat it, you can't sell a vaccine. Like, it's against the law. And this company was very, like, possibly connections. Maybe they worked to discredit this other drug and have a ton of people say there's no way that this could work. I don't know. Could there be real-world connections? Who knows? It's so funny how many stories like this we see. There was a Blacklist episode with something very similar. And I don't know, it's like everybody just all of a sudden, again, similar to what I was talking about with like the politicians thing, which, was that this season? I think that was this season. God, my days run together. But there was that feeling of politicians are crooked and corrupt and you can't trust them. And all of a sudden 2016 happened and everybody's like, oh yeah, politicians say this guy's bad, I trust him. Well, same thing with big companies, big pharma. You know, these companies that are making millions of dollars, and people are like, well, I don't know if I trust them. They could be doing a bunch of shady stuff on the side. How do we know we can trust the stuff that they're giving us? And then suddenly 2021 hits, and everybody's like, oh, I trust that big company. I trust them to help us all and save our lives. Let me just put this thing in my body that there's not really been that much time to test. When you look at how long it normally takes for vaccines and drugs to test. Let me just go ahead and trust this big company. It's so weird. And the same people that are pushing for, oh no, you can trust that, are the same people who will look at, like, you know, Jeff Bezos and Amazon and be like, oh, you can't trust Jeff Bezos. He's a multi-billionaire. He owns this big, huge company. Big companies don't serve us. They don't help us at all. It's just odd. I don't get it. But then, like I said, just episodes like this where I have to say, like, what, do you think, oh, it happens on TV, that could never happen in real life? If it happens on TV, no way. Well, COVID happened on TV, the masks are happening on TV, that all happened in real life. They're putting stuff on there that probably has happened and probably is happening, and it's like everybody just sort of puts the blinders on. Just, oh, that'll never happen. It's so bizarre. But anyways, that's my little soapbox thing. Sorry if I offended anyone. Not really, because I don't care anymore. It's so easy to offend everyone. Who gives a crap? But no, as far as the case itself, the doctor, there were moments where I got a little frustrated with the doctor himself. And I get it was kind of one of those, he's not the most... Not intelligent, that's not the right word. It's... What's the word I'm looking for? There's that kind of social thing where you don't really get how society works. You don't really get how, you know, courts work. You don't get how the process works, you know, at the end when he was blaming them. I don't know, it just seemed like he was a little ignorant about how real life works. And there were moments where I got a little frustrated with that, because yes, there are people like him that exist. Doesn't mean that I have to like them as a character when they show up on TV. And yeah, that's just the sense that I got from him, is just somebody who's very out of touch with society. He seems to think that what he's doing is okay because the ends justify the means. But you have to realize at some point that your actions have consequences. If you're going to go steal, even if, you know, yes, it's the stuff you made, it's the research you did, you signed a contract. That's your responsibility. So you going and stealing that research after you signed a contract which gave it to this company, that's on you. It's your responsibility. And yes, obviously he's a good guy and you want to root for him, but also there's a sense of he did a lot of shady stuff too. You know, he did a lot of stuff that was outside of the law. The company is obviously the most evil in the scenario, but that doesn't mean I'm necessarily okay with everything this doctor did. You know, and I kind of feel like the show is trying to excuse what he did because it was for a good cause. I feel like that's, I don't know, it's just too easy and straightforward. Like, there should be a bit more discussion of, well, hang on a minute, he did steal this, he did sign this thing. And they did give him a little pushback at the start, but after that it was basically just, oh no, he's 100% right. We got to convince him that 100% right. And I don't know. It seemed like there should be a little bit more discussion. The other thing that I really don't know how I feel about is this whole thing with Taylor and her kid, and now her ex-husband is seeing this girl. I kind of feel like Taylor's in the wrong, you know, because I get it, it's awkward, it's weird that your ex is now seeing somebody else, bringing her around your kid. And I mean, obviously I'm not speaking, well, kind of speaking from some experience, because I mean, it kind of happened with me. As far as my parents splitting up. But I don't know, it just kind of felt like Taylor's reaction was a little overdone, because it's obviously been a minute since they split up, so him seeing somebody else is not unheard of, and in fact, it sounds like this is something that they've talked about for a while, but it was kind of her, not responsibility, but kind of her fault a little bit, because it was so sudden. It's not like he could just tell the girl, okay, get out, my son's on the way and I can't see you because I have this deal with my ex. Like, that would be weird to explain. So it is kind of Taylor's fault in the sense that, yeah, job, obviously that got in the way, that's something that you can't control, but at the same time, you can't blame him because you're the one that thrust your kid onto him just out of nowhere so quickly. So you can't really blame him for having the girl around whenever this is probably the only time they get to see each other if he's trying not to, you know, have her around your son or whatever. But then also, like, just how she's treating her. And I guess this is probably, there's probably a feeling of what happened between her and her ex. There's probably a feeling of, oh, well, she's just some, girl just like him. And obviously her opinion of him is not very high. So means her opinion of her is not very high. But from all accounts, it seems like this girl's pretty nice. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe it's just she's putting on an act. But she seems like a good person. She's trying to watch after your son. She's there for him. Yes, it's a little weird that he left the son with this girl that he's seeing all alone and like just went off to work. Like that is maybe a little too far, especially since Taylor just found out about this girl. But at the same time, when you react the way you do, I can kind of get why he didn't want to introduce you to this girl, because you're being a little bit too much of a jerk in this scenario. Just like forcefully handing her money, thank you very much, and then just dragging your son away. What has this girl done? She's dating your ex. Okay, yeah, that's weird. Not saying you have to be friends with her, but to treat her like that just seemed a little over the top, and it made Taylor look like she's in the wrong, like she's the bad person in this situation. And because she's one of the main characters, you should want to root for her, and I don't think the show did a good job of making me want to root for her. I'm just like, wow, that was wrong, Taylor. That was bad. We didn't even really get a conclusion to this story. Like, she takes the son away, and then that's the last we hear of it. So I don't know what's going to happen next. We'll probably hear more about it either in this episode or the one after this one I'm about to watch. But I hope they address the fact that Taylor was kind of in the wrong. Like, I get her frustration, I get how she feels about the situation, but I think her reaction put her in the situation where, no, now you're the one being a jerk, you're the one who needs to go apologize, because you're being kind of ridiculous. But anyways, that's about it for this episode, so on to episode 9, I'll see you there. Now, episode 9, The Bad Client. Gotta admit, this is probably the worst episode in these past 2 seasons. And it wasn't for a lot of it. Like, I was really enjoying some of what they were talking about. I was enjoying the moral dilemma, the quandaries they were bringing up. It was all really good, and it's stuff that needs to be talked about, especially when that came out. I mean, really, it's stuff that should be talked about, and stuff that should be realized, that most people were not realizing. In fact, still not realizing. Looking at you, Twitter. But, I mean, really, it's something that needs to be discussed. If you don't fight for the people that you disagree with being silenced, then yes, they will, when they start silencing the people you do agree with, well, guess what? They're going to use the same foundation that they use to silence those you disagree with. It's going to happen eventually, if you let it. And I'm like, this is all really good. She's the perfect amount of just this kind of douchey person who doesn't really care what she says as long as she's getting followers, as long as she's getting people to listen. She's pompous, she's arrogant. Perfect client to have in this situation, because this is the type of person that I feel like most of the time would be getting attacked. And it's still within her right in the First Amendment to say what she says. Now, granted, like they pointed out, obviously there are some things you can't say. Like, you can't say bomb in an airport. You can't shout fire in a crowded place. Stuff like that can harm people, that's different. But of course, that's where, especially in these past couple of years, they've started to really stretch the line of what is harm speech, what is harmful to other people. And that's where people have been starting to get silenced, because the people who are making these rules and trying to say, oh, that's harmful. Well, you're saying it's harmful, but how do we know you're not just saying that because you just don't want it? You don't want what they're saying to get out. You don't want what they're saying to reach the general public. Now, in this case, of course, what she was saying, she didn't have proof. She was constantly just badgering this man. Honestly, there could have been a defamation suit, if we're being totally honest, because I'm pretty sure that's a thing. Like, if you make all of these claims and it's proved to be not true, then you could sue her for defamation. But that's where, in this scenario, clearly she was wrong in what she was saying. It doesn't mean that she broke the law, though. Even when he goes and decides he wants to end it all, it's not. It is her fault. That doesn't mean that by the law she is at fault and she should have to pay. And I felt like that's kind of where it was going. By the end of it, we're going to see everybody takes a stand and says, you know what? We need to protect the First Amendment. From her point of view, I was hoping maybe seeing some of what happened, maybe it would help her see to be a bit more careful about what she's talking about. But they just ended it on such a poor note that threw everything else out the window. The jury finds her liable. So essentially, she doesn't have the right of the First Amendment because clearly everything she said, that went against somehow. The jury decided, no, you can't say that, so you have to pay her now. So the First Amendment is now shot and shattered and tattered and all of that. And then on top of that, she reacts, oh, I lost? Oh, well, I've got personal liability insurance. This whole thing, it's going to give me bad publicity, which is just going to make me even more popular. So I'm going to be signing a new contract here soon, which I hate to say is actually more accurate than I'd like to admit. Because, yeah, for some reason people don't realize bad publicity, still publicity. You give attention to these people, you try to call these people out that are just basically trolls, you're essentially just giving them what they want. I mean, if I'm being realistic, sometimes I do it. I don't go, like, threatening anybody, but I love to just mess with people online and see their reactions. Like, you get on, like, if I'm talking soccer, I love to get on, like, Man U and Arsenal posts and just, like, make fun of them and see all of the fans just come at me. Like, oh, you just don't even know. You weren't even alive that long. Your club has no history. Oh, you suck. I love that because it's funny to me. And that's my extent of trolling. That's what I like to do as far as trolling. But some of these people, they will literally, I mean, they'll threaten, they'll do all of this stuff. They'll say racist things, they'll say sexist things. All they want is people to notice them. They feel like it gives them power. So the more attention you give them, even if you're calling them out, even if you're calling them a sexist or racist, even if you're bashing them, they're sitting there going, haha, I've got their attention. And that's what people don't really understand. Like, that's something that Benny actually did talk about, which, again, also didn't really get talked about much. Part of the First Amendment is she's free to make all these statements. You're free to ignore them. You're free to just say, whatever. She's talking out her ass, I don't care. And stop watching. I mean, he talked about it. It's not like she forced this Jeremy guy to stay on Twitter. It's not like she forced him to watch a show. Yes, her posse were causing him issue, but that's on those people. And yes, she was calling for a rally, but throwing a brick is not something she told them to do. So it's like you're trying to attribute all of these bad things that were done to him to her. And it's not like she was saying, go abuse him. Yes, some of what she was saying is harmful in the sense that if he is having these mental issues, it could lead him down a path to suicide. But that's also where sometimes as somebody who's nearby, his wife, that's where she's got to realize, keep him away from social media, keep him away from that show. It's a little bit of everybody. You can't pin all the blame on her. And that's the thing, there's just so much about this case that by the end of it I'm thinking, what was accomplished here? What was really accomplished? Was their whole point to just say this is why the First Amendment is bad because people like her will just continue to get power, continue to get traction and fame? Like, were they really trying to say, don't support the First Amendment? We need to look at trying to shut down some of these First Amendment rights? Because if that's the case, then you really don't know the law and you really don't even understand what you're writing. Because you had really good points from Bull talking about why the First Amendment is there in the first place. So, I don't know, it felt like we were heading towards one conclusion, and then all of a sudden, like at the end, they just pulled the rug out from under us and brought us to an entirely opposite conclusion to show everything they just showed us was completely wrong, completely false. Don't listen to anything we just said. The First Amendment, it sucks. Get rid of it. All these people that are spreading misinformation according to people who are, making money off of all the stuff that people are saying is not true. They're all spreading this information. We got to take away their First Amendment rights. They can't talk anymore. Yep. That's what I took it as. Maybe I missed something at the end. Maybe there's another moral to be learned in all of this. But I just saw it as you were teaching us one moral. You were teaching us how the First Amendment, even if abused, is still there for a reason. It's still something we should honor. And then at the end of it, they're just like, no, screw the First Amendment. We find her liable. She still sucks as a person. She's gonna abuse the First Amendment. This is why we need to hamper down and try to really dig in and really hold back some of these First Amendments on people. Like, they shouldn't be able to talk. Oh, really disappointed. And honestly, like, I have IMDb up right now, and I will say where most of the episodes this season have been, they've mostly been above 7.0, except for the very first one, the Corona episode. Most of them have been at least a 7.0 or higher. This one finally dropped below 7. And deservedly so. Like, it's definitely some of the stupidest writing that this show has had in a while. Like, I do remember some earlier episodes not being very well written, but recently it's been solid. Like, it has been good writing, it has been good storytelling. It just flew off the rails on this one. So I want to believe that, like, they had an ending where everything worked out. The jury did find her not liable. The woman did sort of learn that maybe not just accusing one person, maybe being more focused on trying to track down the truth and not, blindly just following, oh, well, I've got tunnel vision now. I only see him as the culprit, so he's got to be the culprit. Because that's the thing. She told this whole emotional story about finding her son's killer, which, honestly, I was surprised if it was... They didn't even really confirm whether it was true or not, because it seemed more like a setup, the way she told Benny to ask her the question. But anyways, but the thing is, it wasn't like she had this one idea of who the killer was, and she tracked him down, and then they caught him. No, she was like, hey, I need all the information I can get. Give me all the information so we can find out who killed my son. And that's how they ended up finding him. In this case, she was so focused on the stepfather, that's all she wanted. She only wanted information on him. She only wanted him to talk. And that goes completely against why she started it. So I'm like, what happened here? Anyways. But I want to believe that was originally the ending, is that it all worked out, kind of fitting the moral, showing that we got to be better. We got to be better as people. We can't just be trying to take away everybody's First Amendment rights. We can't be trying to take away everybody's free speech. We can't be trying to take away people's right to what they're allowed to say and all that. No, I just repeated myself 3 times. But that's kind of the thing, is you can say whatever you want. As long as it's not directly harming somebody, you're allowed to say whatever you want. It can be stupid. It can be really smart. Go ahead, say whatever you want. As the president has shown multiple times, you can say really stupid stuff. You can say incoherent things. And that's your right. You can say that stuff. But I feel like at some point, somebody came into the writing room or something like that, and I don't know, maybe they had a last-minute rewrite? Because I know this is coming shortly after another event that happened, because this was February of 2021. So this was happening shortly after something else, which people are claiming was an improper use of free speech and inciting violence and all this stuff, even though there's no proof that any of that happened. But anyways, so maybe they just came in the room and they're like, oh crap, we can't be trying to say that free speech is okay. Let's rewrite this ending, guys. We gotta rewrite it so that way we make sure people know the First Amendment is not for everyone. That's why the Constitution says we the people, except for a few. Yeah. Yep. Okay. I'm done with my little rant. I'm done with my frustration. Really, really, really hope that this was just a one-time thing. A one-time thing for this season. I hope it gets better and stays better for the rest of the season, because this was a tough one to get through. Danny's stuff didn't even really account for anything. Like, her father shows up after all this time, dies, and then apparently she found out, he was keeping an eye on her this whole time, and... Okay. just random emotional story for her out of nowhere that doesn't really connect to anything else happening this season. Oh man. But all that being said, that's it for this episode. So let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. What were your thoughts on this episode, on these 3 episodes? Let me know if you can talk about, discuss, all that good stuff. Leave a like and subscribe for future bowl reviews, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.